Welcome, everyone. Really excited to host our first pre-med AMA. We host a chat, and all of you have seen that, when you post a question, you'll get like 1,000,001 responses, right? You'll get lots of conflicting opinions. And what's funny to see from my perspective, having had these conversations so many times with students, is that even the conflicting opinions are often like both true. And I think a lot of the problem with kind of asking the questions and getting conflicting answers in a chat format is that there's very little context being provided. So even people saying conflicting things when they're both correct, the difference is they're speaking from different experiences and speaking within different contexts. So what we're going to do tonight is I have like a small prepared kind of monologue of like the 10 facts I think all pre-med should know about MCAT and applications, things that I see often commonly missed, and just give you like a frame of reference as you finish up your pre-med career and how to approach MCAT and how to approach applications of things you should know. And I have with me a number of medical students and pre-med students who can share their experiences, either having like done really well in the MCAT, having surveyed medical students, or just medical students who have done it firsthand. So that being said, a few people you're going to hear from tonight is myself, Menachem Jacobs, co-founder. He's here for support. I'm not sure how much he'll provide, but he's a great resource if any of you know him personally. Reaching out to him and hearing his opinion is always extremely helpful. We have Avrami Karp, who's currently at New York Medical College. We have Shimi Gorel, who is currently at Downstate. We have Mendy Zlatopolsky, also at Downstate. Did I miss any medical students? If not, we have two pre-med students, Tzvi Grossman, who's currently in his application cycle, and David Heimwitz, also in his application cycle, both of which would be able to talk a little bit more about the more current resources, something that I'm not too well versed on, something that I'd actually be interested in hearing. So that being said, we'll do like a little monologue. We'll do a few minutes of just what I think students should know, and then I'd be happy for anyone who has anything to share to kind of chime in with their experience, or call me out if you think I'm saying something that's old or outdated or just not true. I'm happy to be called out. I think that's going to be the real value of doing this session as a group, is that we'll have that conversation and be able to provide the context of which all these answers are generally not provided in context. So that being said, why are we doing this session in January? Applications open up in June. The reason we're doing it in January is that it's important to realize that there's like a timeline, right? There's a correct timeline of how to properly prepare. So generally speaking, it takes about 3 months to prepare for MCAT. What I find is that it's not even the fact that it takes 3 months to prepare. Some people are well prepared in 2 months, but the 3-month mark is generally kind of that golden time frame where you're serious enough, where you're really going to feel the pressure of the MCAT coming up, and you're going to start sitting down and studying. At least that's what it was for me. That's what I hear from a lot of students. If you want to say, hey, I'm going to study for 6 months, the reality is knowing your test is 6 months away usually provides that kind of like, oh, I got plenty of time. And it's not the most like serious studying. And if it's not the most serious studying, then I question how valid and how helpful that really is. When you study, you want it to be very laser focused. You want to get all your studying in a short period of time, so it's all connected. If you review biology 6 months before your exam, and then by the time you get back to it, you're like 2 months before, there's that massive gap. And it's just not an effective way of studying. So 3 months timeline. So right now is January. Most people who really want to apply on time should be considering taking their MCAT around March, April. Now, that leaves about 3 months between taking your MCAT and actual applications, which may seem like a lot, right? You may think like, I don't need 3 months to prepare my application. But what I will say is that when you prepare an application, there's a lot to it. There really is. And I think lots of students don't realize that. And that's something that I see that's often missed, is that you need to get your letters of recommendation. You need to type up, 15 of your experiences. And it's going to take time to figure out which experiences you want to add, how you want to write them. It takes time for people to get your letters of recommendation in, right? As amazing as the people who are writing these letters are, a lot of them are busy, right? And so it may take time. You may have to harass them. I know students come to me for letters of rec. I have a turnaround time of about a week. but that's not the, the typical, like you're lucky if you generally get the week, right? And there are times where it takes me much longer depending on what's going on. And I can only imagine you're asking someone prestigious who has a real career. I don't have a career, and you're asking someone who is busy. It's going to take time to get those letters in, and you have to coordinate with 6 to 7 people, right? Because you're going to get approximately, I want to say, about 7 letters of recommendation. So just to talk a little bit about that, when you apply, you need they allow for up to 10 letters. When I was in pre-med, they didn't recommend getting all 10 letters. They said it was a little bit like superfluous. Not all your letters were going to be super quality when you get that volume. So they recommended about 7 letters was appropriate, 7 good high quality letters. You can ask for more and then, whittle it down to the most important letters of rec. You're also going to need to get a committee letter, or generally you're going to get a committee letter. Committee letters are written usually by like the department chair. So again, I went to Turo, I did my pre-med there. In Queens, there was one specific person we sent all our letters to. She would read through all our letters and create a new letter that kind of like represented your application as a whole. So they'd find a common theme amongst all the letters you submit, and then they would write this additional letter. Keep in mind, every pre-med applying in your school, in your classes, right, 15 or so people, they all have to get this letter. And so the person running these committee letters is going to wait till all these letters come in. Each person has 7 letters or so. That's a ton of work. And so they usually don't wake up until like April time, which means it's a little bit asking for trouble, because it's going to take time for them to read all that. It's going to take time for them to create the committee letter, and then you're not going to submit your application until you get the committee letter. So that's just like one part of the application that's very time consuming. And so it's really helpful to have those 3 months between when you've taken the MCAT to when you're applying. So, and that's just one part, right? You're going to want to write a personal statement that goes through many drafts, right? The best writing is rewriting. So you probably, I think I went through 7 drafts. That might be excessive, but from what I know, like that's kind of average. You're going to go through a lot of drafts, and it's going to take time to get feedback, rewrite, feedback, rewrite. And so again, this is one thing that's just very time consuming. So one thing I see students do all the time is like, oh, I'm going to take my MCAT in May, get my score in June, and apply June, July. And I tell them, you really got to plan, just if you can, plan a better timeline, because applications are really like time consuming. All the components of applications are time consuming. And you want to give yourself a few months before they open up in June to get that all together. Now, the important part of getting that all together in June is because medical schools do rolling admissions, right? We all know this. We all know that if you apply in December, if you apply in June and you get an interview in November, they may accept you in December before they even interview the person in January. They're giving acceptances before they're even interviewing other candidates. And what that means is that if you are not the greatest candidate, but you're on the docket first, and you get your interview first, you have a better chance of getting in, because you're not competing with the person who has better scores and better everything who applied late. So always 100% apply on time. Like, I can't stress that enough. I myself, I would say I was a pretty strong candidate. There's no doubt that applying on time like pushed me over the top. I can't stress that enough. Rolling admissions, apply on time. Applying on time means you have a good timeline. Means that you're thinking of MCAT in January, you're taking it in March, you have from April, May, and June to put everything together to knock out to knock it out on time and be like of the first pool of applicants. Now keep in mind, you're competing with like everyone who's type A personality, right? The people who go to medical school, like literally every single one of them is type A, and you see it more like when you're in medical school, and it's honestly quite funny. But when you're applying, it's frustrating because like the website will crash, right? Because like literally every person's waiting on the dot, like trying to send it out as soon as they can. But be of the first pool. And that's going to be the same thing with secondaries, right? The sooner you send in your application, the sooner you get your secondaries, the sooner you're rolling, right? And then when you want to send updates to school, which you absolutely can, you can send emails. We could talk about that more at length. But the point is, all of that is just going to be more timely. You'll have a better opportunity to make better decisions. So that being said, right, we just emphasized like the timeline and the importance of doing your MCAT on time. I want to talk a little bit about resources. So I'm not going to go in depth. lots of students here who are gonna talk about like the resources out there. But there are two things I want to say. First is that you're gonna get a lot of advice, right? Lots of students use lots of different resources, and nobody is wrong. Like it's very rare that someone's just going to give you horrible advice, right? There's like 5 main kind of resources out there, and they're all going to be extremely similar, right? And so it becomes dependent on kind of like where you're holding as a student, what you know, and what you need to know, and what you're going to learn, right? So some resources are much better for cars and psychology, and some are much better for the sciences. So lots of self-reflection. It's really important, and it's going to be really important as you go through your like medical career. Like this is something we're always doing as medical students, right? You have very limited time to study. You pick the things that you feel you need the most to work on, right? And I recently spoke to program director and I asked him what's a good what do you look for in a student, and he said self-awareness. The student knows their limitations, and so when you're thinking of MCAT resources, I want you to just self-reflect. It's not a bad thing to say I'm really bad at reading comprehension. I'll tell you, that was the case for me. I was really bad at reading comprehension, and I find that that's like more prevalent amongst the guys. I don't know, maybe being in yeshiva, or I don't know what it is, but I find that the guys have like horrible reading comprehension. If that's the case for you, keep that in mind and kind of tailor your studying that way. In addition to that, keep in mind how you like to study. There are different types of studying, right? Some people like to do practice questions. Some people like to study first and then do practice questions. So keeping in mind that A, what you need to work on, and B, what your style of learning is, will kind of dictate which resource you use. Okay, and so you may get conflicting opinions. One person says use Blueprint, one person says use Wyzen. Doesn't matter. They're probably both really good, and they probably cover almost the exact same thing. They're probably just a difference in execution. Okay, so keep in mind how you study, try to understand yourself, and try to see what you're gaining from the resource. And then the other thing I will say is that a huge part of the MCAT, and going forward, not just MCAT, medical school as well, your board examinations, a massive part of it is stamina, right? Like this is probably the first time you're going to be taking a test for so long. Maybe if you're in Turo and you had back-to-back finals, like you're a little bit used to it. We had that, but the MCAT is a unique challenge that becomes less unique as you go on. Now in medical school, our average exam is 120 questions that takes like 3 hours or so. That's like the normal typical exam. So build that stamina. It's a really don't towards the end, you got to be timing yourself. You have to realize whether or not you can sit for hours and hours and hours, because it's not something that you'll be accustomed to. So aside from the fact that you need to master the content, you do need to master kind of the stamina of being able to sit. So, aside from like practice questions, practice exams. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to say, and the only reason I'm sharing this is because I used it and I've never seen it once on the chat. And to me, it's kind of mind-boggling. I've never seen it. So there's a resource, Scott Roberts. I don't know how many have heard of him. I've never seen it mentioned.
For the win.
Yeah, I've never seen it mentioned on the chat once. And to me, that's a shocker. To me, that's like a travesty. So there are two guys out there, the Scott Roberts and Romano. If you like, so these two guys, what makes them so special is that they're not just teaching like, Kaplan's gonna, right? These tests put out like a curriculum, right? These are the things we want you to know, right? They're gonna be very broad range. They're just gonna be like, know everything, right? You gotta know everything. But the reality is that it's a test that likes to focus on core concepts, right? And those core concepts just get tested repeatedly. They pick the same concepts for the most part. So there's high yield and low yield concepts. Kaplan will try to like rank which concepts are higher than others, but they're not great. Scott Roberts and this guy Romano is actually for dental, so you don't have to worry about him. But the special thing about these guys is that they're kind of like private tutors. I mean, they give it as a class. You could use them as a private tutor, but they're not like one of these like Kaplan courses. They're private tutors who teach their students geared specifically to the questions that are often asked on the MCAT. But like, you should all know the name Scott Roberts. You should look him up. I believe the company is Think MCAT. Watch his videos, and know the limitations. So I did Scott. I mean, he took my score in biology through the roof. So just so we're all on the same like playing field, like everyone, like transparency. One thing the reason I love hosting these sessions and teaching students and things like that is because I don't consider myself a generally like top 1% really smart student. I'm really not. I struggle a lot with academics. What I shine is like the extracurricular stuff. you know, starting a nonprofit and doing silly things. So studying is always difficult for me. So to master content, I usually do fine. Master my MCAT was not phenomenal. I was in the 514 range on almost all my practices, and in real life I got a 511. Really nothing to write home about. In fact, when I took my interview at Downstate, the guy just like harassed me. He's like, "This is the lowest score I've ever interviewed." And I was kind of shocked because I've like
Garbage.
spoken.
I don't believe it.
Right, I've spoken to students who they've gotten lower, but my MCAT score was not special. But what was special was my biology score. So that was like through the roof. That was like my highest score. And I already told you, like I wasn't good at cars. I did pretty poorly on cars, and like psych was okay. But I really attribute like my success in biology due to Scott Roberts. I think that's going to be one of the most effective tools you can use. My recommendation, again, we're going to hear a lot from the others about like resources because they'll know better than I. But my recommendation would probably be, if I had to redo it, use something like a Kaplan to get like a general background, and then do something like Scott where you really narrow down on the topics you really want to know. Okay, so that's kind of my 2 cents on the timeline, on applications, things I want you guys to know when you're doing your application stuff. And my one piece on Scott Roberts that I think everyone should know. That being said, I want to open the floor to our medical students, Shimon, Menachem, Zlato, and Avermi Karp. I see Zisha is here. Zisha, if you want to weigh in, please do. Yeah, I would love to hear what you guys think about what we talked about. If there's anything you want to add, go for it.
Somebody want to start? I can start.
Not all at once, please.
Yeah, I don't mind starting. First of all, Mark, that was an amazing intro. I thought that was really, I think you hit all the like 8+ points, like everything important to know that I don't think was spelled out enough by like Dr. Shinar or certain pre-med advisors. She's amazing, by the way. If anyone is in Turtle Lenses, she's actually unbelievable.
Well, one interjection for pre-med advisors, because I get this all the time where students ask for like questions and they go, well, my pre-med advisor said, okay, keep in mind pre-med advisors didn't go to medical school. Keep in mind, pre-med advisors generally have an agenda, right? They want you to take their courses. They're going to hold their letters of recommendation against you, like if you don't take my course. And it's very geared towards like what they need to do. So if you hear something from a medical student, it's probably a little bit more, it has a little more weight in a sense. Like not everything they say is the golden word. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no. So just 2 points I wanted to just add. The first thing is the timeline thing is 100% right. Like I know tons of people that applied late and they really had trouble getting in or they didn't get in. So definitely the timeline is a very underappreciated aspect of the application process. So I'm really happy you brought that up. Just one thing I wanted to just add, and then anyone, the other guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but again, I don't think you should sacrifice an early application for an MCAT score. I think I don't know if that was mentioned or yet, but like if you're struggling with the MCAT and you have a date and you're not hitting your target scores on your practice tests, then push it off. It's worth applying later with a better score than applying earlier with a worse score. I think that's my 2 cents. I wanted to just spell that out.
Yeah, I like that you added that because like that could be, it's like touchy. Yeah. Personally, that's what I had, and I ended up pushing off my MCAT and I waited the year. It is, I would just add like it could be dependent like where your scores are. Just keep in mind if you don't do well on your MCAT and you want to retake it and get a better score, you have to beat the confidence interval, right? So if you get a 5, like when you get your score, there's like 2-point like range. Like if you get a 510, they're going to be, okay, your score is within 512 to 508. That's your range. If you retake your MCAT, even if you get 2 points better and you get a 512, you're technically within that original range of your MCAT.
Yeah.
So that's like an important thing to consider. Right. And like life considerations, I get it. Like sometimes you have a questionable score you want to apply with, and like a lot of life factors. I would recommend like talking to someone. But I think what Shimi just said was 100% true. I myself pushed it off and waited the year. Very happy I did so.
Also, a lot of people don't know this. Like, it's not like law school. They all the medical schools see all your scores. Like, you can't apply with one score. That's an important thing, which I don't know people know that. However many times you take the MCAT is on your application. So no matter whether you took it 2 or 3, 4 years ago, that's also on your application, and the schools can see that. So what Mark's saying is really right. Like, you got to beat that confidence interval to show them that you really improved. One other thing I wanted to add about Scott Roberts, which first of all, I'm a big fan, but I took the MCAT in 2021. So just so people know, I'm a little bit more recent. Again, not fresh, but definitely more recent. So Scott Roberts is, yeah, like Mark said, amazing. He really teaches you the ins and outs. He's been doing his thing for, I think, over 10 to 15 years, maybe 20, 25 years at this point. But he's really the pro, I think, and really an underrated player in the game. But I think two important things that, again, this is what I found personally, and if the other medical students have, other opinions, I'd love to hear. What I found is that Scott Roberts didn't really teach you how to read cars. That was my personal opinion. Like he also had his own cars like problems that I don't know where he got them from, but they were totally not representative of what the AMC tests were. So like he has car sections, but it's Scott Roberts. It's the guy's name, SCOTT, Scott Roberts. So his cars prep was, I thought, honestly, a total waste of time, but it was definitely worth it for the other sections. I thought biochem, chem phys, and psych soc. I think he really like hit it out of the park on those. Just again, something to add about that is that, and Scott's good, I think, if you have a solid base. I mean, if you're going in, don't think of Scott as like a Kaplan course or a Jack Weston course where they really teach it from the ground up. Scott really helps you further your game. This is, I think, what Mark was saying. I don't know if you spelled it out, but you have to go into Scott with a really solid foundation and everything. And if you're looking to get a boost of 5, 6, 7, 8 points, Scott can get you there because he can teach you the real tricks to get the answers in fast, or how to look for sneaky ways that the AMC might try to get you. But he's not going to give you a totally like built foundation. You really need to go in either having read the Kaplan books or having a really solid undergraduate science education. Otherwise, you're not going to make the most of Scott. That's what I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, exactly, 100%. And I will say that it's sneaky the way you think you're studying for cars and you're studying just for like the section cars. Reading comprehension is incorporated into like every part of the test. Like every part of the test can be a difficult read. Cars even more so, because they'll ask you on some ridiculous passage from Homer that like no one understands. Like the reading comprehension is important for all sections. So like if that's a weak point, which I see for a lot of guys, it really is, like, worth investing the time into like learning how to read these things properly. Yeah, Zlato, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I do. So you guys are mentioning pushing off the test. I am a serial procrastinator, and I'm paying the price for it in med school.
Okay.
It is rough. So, yeah, if you need to push off your test, go and push off your test, but don't be like me and like it was also like COVID and it was canceled and whatever. Instead of like 4 months, it took me like 10 for no good reasons. It was just a bunch of excuses. So for all the serial procrastinators like me out there, don't do it. Don't push off your test. Just like, this is a hard deadline. I have to do it by 4 months, 3 months, whatever it is. And okay, if you reach that point and you're not ready, obviously push. But you gotta start those habits. You gotta set yourself up for success already by MCAT, because otherwise you're gonna be like me in med school and you're cramming 2 weeks before your exam, and it's a bad situation. So develop those habits early. Set yourself up for success, and yeah.
Yeah, I would say one tip that I had, because I remember that year that I was studying, I like gotten engaged and I was like all over the place. And like I kept saying like, oh, I'm gonna study. I started with Scott like a few times. Having an exam date, huge difference. Like putting the money in, setting up the time frame where you're like, now I have 3 months and the timer's already ticking. Kind of, it does help force you to study a little bit. It's not perfect, procrastination's rough.
Yeah, and take a practice test and really like destroy your ego and your confidence, and that'll push you to study. I see so many. I speak to a bunch of pre-meds now, and they're all just pushing off their exam, and they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing, and then they pushed it 3 times. And like, okay, I'll just take it. So you got to get out of that. You got to just
that cycle.
Don't procrastinate. You get out of that cycle.
I also like to take a second to just explain getting into medical school. Like I didn't realize, like everyone knows it's important, right? We all know it's like difficult, it's hard, right? But you don't realize what a privilege it is getting into an MD program. Like I did definitely, like now that I'm reflecting and I look at like match rates for certain competitive programs, and I see there's like a distinct difference between matching in a very competitive program versus like MD versus DO. Like the reality is there's a difference. Right? Nothing against DO. I applied a bunch of DO schools and I was going to go DO at some point. And if you can go DO, like 100% go for it. But being in medical school, even in a DO program, is a tremendous opportunity. You realize like the people making millions of dollars a year in some fancy specialty, right? It was going to medical school that gave them the opportunity. Like everyone has kind of like an even playing field when you get to medical school. So when you get to medical school, it's a huge deal. Take it seriously. Apply on time. Apply with good scores. You know, it's often worth taking time off, you know, if it fits in with your life, and you know, and it will really make a difference. Like, you know, you're going from like a 506 to like a 512, you know, you're really changing. That is life changing, right? Your career is career changing. So take it seriously. It's really hard to see that as a pre-med because you know it's really hard. But when you start to like you know, comes down to like, okay, I really want to actually pursue a career now in medicine. I want to apply for residency. Being in an MD program is a huge opportunity. You'll see the match rates are just different from various schools, like whether you like did international or whether you did DO versus MD. So take it seriously. Push off if you need to, but like study hard, try to get it right on the first time. That's a huge deal. Better get it right the first time than to like redo. So yeah, Romy, I don't think we've heard from you. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think this is the quietest I've ever been. It's a discerning experience for me. Yeah, a couple of things. So I'm just going to try to fill in some of the gaps, I think, of some elements that weren't spoken about.
Sure.
I'm just going to start backwards. So for the love of God, if you do get an interview, please prepare. I had my Einstein interview was an epic disaster because I usually count on like being quick on my feet verbally. I'm like, I don't need to prepare. It was like 2 days before my wedding. Did not go well. Don't do that, please. Like you work so hard, you busted. Just go to the school's website, learn everything there is to know about the school. Learn about how the school views themselves, right? They think they're something. At the end of the day, you want to go there because we all want to be physicians, but in their minds, they're saving you money to do one student-free clinic at a time. And if you're going to bring up research, they're going to ask you about your research experience. So just like be careful there. Additionally, I would say that like I'm somebody that comes from a very strong liberal arts background. Like I like reading, and you know, for me, cars was fun. But I mean that, but I was like terrible at sciences. So I would say that my strategy was always, you know, obviously try to be as good as you can in the sciences, but be willing to tank. There's 4 sections, right? Be willing to tank one of the sections, and not in a bad way. And that shouldn't be your game plan. But I walked out of I took that break in when I took my MCAT. I was like, okay, that section went terribly. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to buckle down, and I ended up doing well in my MCAT. So that was that was also, I would say, is like if you're in your MCAT and you feel like you bombed the section, don't let it get to you. You'll still probably do fine. I think like you will do better than you think often if you're prepared. Additionally, as somebody that like I can really speak to having a very weak science background, like I'm terrible at math. I think the Kaplan books are really helpful. And again, you know, it's unfortunately there is a limited amount of time, so just be prepared to not do as well, you know, in one of the sections. And I don't mean that, maybe that might be counterintuitive advice. I just don't want people to think that they need to be perfect in all the sections and, oh my God, my life's over if I can't get my car score up or something. It's not the case.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I want to give it some context because I don't want people like walking out being like, oh, great, I'm going to neglect one part of the MCAT. So, you know, I just want to clarify like that one thing. Like these tests are made to get in your head. Like, I mean, even like in medical school, right? I so many times, like the first 5 questions are honestly the ones that I flag the most often. Like they're the hardest questions. They get in your head right away. And so that could definitely affect like the rest of the section, and you get in your own head, right? It's a long, stressful day. We talked about like endurance. So like Avram is saying, like take the test and you pray for the best. You know, your natural instincts will kind of kick in that like you've studied so much, you'll probably get something on par with your practice exams. So take those practice exams and like, you know, have a little bit of faith.
Also, Mark, just one final point I forgot to say that I see a lot of pre-meds in the chat, like trying to find resources. I think UWorld, in my opinion, is the primary resource. And I would devote probably almost 3 weeks to a month just on UWorld. And they're insanely hard. So just stop and actually really try to think. And when you get an answer, spend 5-10 minutes, go look it up. Like really just stay on it.
Interesting. So I never heard of UWorld for like when I was in pre-med. That's only something we use now in medical school. I will say I happen to like not love like it. I feel like it's also kind of dependent on what kind of learner you are. If you're the type where you can handle like hard questions and come out like getting the basic concept, then for sure, like I think that is the type of resource it is. For me, I'm a baby. Like if I get like 10 wrong, I'm like, I don't know anything and I didn't learn anything. Like I want to get right. Like that builds my confidence and that will help me like go forward. So like again, like we talked in the beginning, self-reflection, knowing what kind of student you are and pick resources accordingly. I didn't even know your world existed for like MCAT. So that's cool to know. Yeah, it's I think that's a great recognition. I see that Sapir Amar had his hand up for quite a while, so go for it.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. I have a question. I'm right now in the MCAT studying, and I wanted to ask because I see my friends, for example, studying for the LSAT. They're timing themselves, for the cars, the reading part. So I want to ask specifically in the biology, the science sections, what will be a good skill to build up if it's like a analytical skill that you will or skills that you will do in order to prepare well before the exam, but at the same time, like what are skills to bear in mind while you take the exam? If it's the time pressure, if it's the making sure that you're able to choose between the two questions, which one is the wrong one, like the correct one, and which one is the one that are usually like like makes everyone choose the wrong one. So yeah.
I feel like the MCAT and most exams you're going to take have like a little bit of all those elements where like the question is like, it's a slightly tricky question. The answers are not perfect. Timing is really important. So I don't know that there is a, like, maybe someone else can weigh in, but I can't think of a specific skill. I think that that skill would also be dependent on what kind of student you are. So if you're a student who takes time to read passages and then takes time to go through each answer in their head, then time is what you got to work on. If you are a student who can't like pick out keywords, then like that's a skill you're going to want to work on. I find that for most students, at least for myself, speaking for myself, like those were all skills I needed. Like I wasn't good at any of them because the MCAT is a very unique test. It's the first time you're going to encounter such a test. And the rest of your testing is going to be like that, right? Step one, step two, the testing never ends. So, if the MCAT stresses you out, just like think of the future, man. But in terms of skills, I'd be hard pressed to pick a specific skill. I feel like we were talking about Scott Roberts is great because he gives you a little bit of all those things. He gives you like how to like pick out the important parts of the question, and then you start triggering in your head what answers to look for. So like that's something unique you're not going to get from Kaplan. Kaplan's just going to regurgitate 4 years of medicine, like 4 years of science in your face, which you need, but it's not going to help with those skills. Someone like Scott Roberts would probably help sharpen those skills a bit.
I could weigh in also on that question if it's okay.
for
So
it.
what I would say is definitely knowing how to pick out passages, like Mark's saying, is an important skill even post the MCAT. Like it's something you really need to take with you throughout your career. Actually, you're gonna have to read through science literature and things like that when you become a physician and when you're a resident, all that. But in terms of building up skills for the MCAT specifically, I had a whole process in terms of studying for the MCAT. We could talk about that later, or someone could text me privately, PM me or something if they want to hear more about it. But I also really wanted to focus on how to focus on learning how to break down these passages. So what I did was I kind of had like a bridge, I called it, in between my content review portion of my studying and my full test portion of studying, where I kind of just focus on passages. So what I did was I went to Jack Weston. I'm sure a lot of the pre-meds are familiar with. It's a website online where he just puts up, I think he at the time, this is 2 years ago, things may have changed, but he was putting up a free pass, MCAT style passage every single day. It started with cars, now he branched out to the sciences, and I used to do that every single day. And I used to go back and do he has a whole library, and you can go back and do every single passage he has, I think, from the past year. So what I used to do is I used to try to do those every single day and time myself and try to work in my timing that way, read through it. He has a timer in the corner. You could see how long it's taking you, and you could try to build that up every single day. And I also used UWorld to try to drill that in, also try to just practice doing passages by themselves independently of a test. I found that to be really helpful. So if you can find a way, I guess put that into your studying, that may help you. It helped me. So
yeah, I remember using his. I was curious to hear what other students liked about it because I don't know. Like I had like mixed reviews. Like I don't know if I would say that they were so representative. At least when I took it, I don't. Maybe it got better over the years. I didn't love it. I felt like it didn't prepare me too well for cars. But then again, it was a weakness of mine. So like I don't blame the resources. I think that's on me. But it's yeah, interesting. If it worked for you.
For timing specifically, I thought it was really helpful.
Oh, timing. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Svi Grossman, I want to hear from you because when did you take the MCAT?
The end of June.
End of June. So you kind of like you just took it. Can we say your score out loud or are you like kind of reserved about it? You don't have to say it.
You can
Okay.
say my score.
So I'm very open. I had that 511, right? Nothing fancy. My best score 514, pretty decent, but I got chewed out on my interview for 511. So he got a 520. Now in my book, that's phenomenal. That's a great score. And that's a recent good score. So so he's not in school just yet. He's in his application cycle. We're working hard to get him into downstate because we wanna recruit good guys. But I feel like hearing his take on some of like the things he prepared would be helpful. So let me ask you one question before I start. So you in my book, at least, I don't know what like everyone else thinks. In my book, you crushed the MCAT. I'm pretty sure Harvard's medical school's like average score is like 519, 520. So in my book, you're top tier here. Are you a genius or do you think that like you were just a regular dude and just happened to prepare really well? Because there's really two types. I really see both. I see both in medical school. I see students who are just like, I know students who like they crushed the MCAT, but they were nothing special. And I know students who crushed the MCAT and they didn't work as hard because they were just really smart. I'm curious to hear what your take is. You don't have to say I'm a genius, but you can hint it. You can be like, I'm pretty smart.
I'm definitely the not genius, but worked hard and studied, I think, effectively.
Okay.
Like just to prove that, like I was plateaued at a 506 until about a month and a half before my MCAT.
Okay.
When so I think what I'd done that last 2 months, whatever, like a bunch of things that I had, a bunch of strategies I employed until then hadn't been working. And like, for example, like I was reading the Kaplan books and like, I was like, I hadn't scheduled a date and all these different things that was talked about, throughout the session tonight. And I think that, over the last month or so, when I was studying, I specifically employed Anki, which I think wasn't discussed yet, but I think that it's such a huge resource that really, I think, took my score to the next level. And I was able to really improve in all the sections with Anki, and I did Scott Roberts in those last 2 months. And that's really what changed me from, 506 to 520 in those, 2 months or so. So I'm definitely not the genius who just didn't study hard and like got a good grade. It was a lot of work, a lot of studying and strategies, and it's how you like. I think also important when you're practicing your practice tests on the AMC specifically, but all the practice tests in real life settings. Like I'm not sure if that was mentioned yet. Like what the real test is going to be like. Like for me, it was down to what I ate, like how I slept, like it was everything. I made sure that like I was just as what I was eating the same things. For example, I usually drink coffee in the morning, but I knew during my test like I can't drink coffee because it's going to make me have to get up a lot. So all these different types of strategies that I had to employ down to test day, and I would simulate that on my practice exams. I think that was also very helpful.
Yeah, I love that. I wore a mask for my practice test. That's amazing. That is so true, by the way. It's a real difference. When I first started school and we all had to show up in person but wear masks for our exams, you're breathing in all that carbon dioxide. Like it for sure affects you. It's like you get claustrophobic or you're
Don't
sweating.
underrated.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay, first off, I'm so happy to hear that. I love like those stories. Like I was a regular dude and like I just studied hard and crushed the MCAT. That's awesome. Two things I want to talk about that you touched on that I think are really important that I really want to emphasize. One is Anki. So for those who don't know, Anki is a flashcard program. It's like a Chinese program, and the idea is that let's say you put in a set of facts, right? And it's flashcard format. So like there's a question, you click enter, and then it shows you the answer. Just like, old-fashioned flashcards. When I studied for my MCAT, I actually used old-fashioned flashcards, which is like wild. But everything's digital now. Anki is like the king resource for flashcards. It is a like staple in medical school. Like you must use it in medical school. I don't think I would have gotten through school without Anki. So it is a powerful resource, extremely powerful. like extremely important to just get those repetitive concepts, and you could tailor it. Like you're getting something wrong, tell the program, I want to see this more often. So I would definitely take a look into that. I don't know what kind of decks exist for MCAT. I'm sure lots of decks exist. I've seen people talk about it on the chat. I 100% like recommend getting used to Anki, using cards. For like I generally like Shimino, like when you guys start downstate, I usually give a little like tutorial like with Anki, like how to use it, and like not to burn out, don't kill yourself with like trying to do thousands of cards if you're not used to it. Benny wants to know, yeah, I actually have a video on how to use Anki if you guys want to do like see it. I send it out to the first year students every year. I think it's helpful for those who have never used it. But maybe we could do like a workshop. But the point is, like, look into that resource. Really helpful, really great. It's not a resource to learn. It's a resource to review. So, like, I'm sure whatever decks they have out there are going to be really helpful. You can ask more about it. I didn't use it for MCAT, so I don't know what decks exist. So that's one thing. Like, I want to stress Anki. I'm sure it's extremely helpful. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about that Tzvi, you mentioned was like those practice exams. So AMC practice exams are like precious, right? And you only get 3 of them. And those are the most reflective of what the test looks like. You get 4 of them nowadays? Okay, so you get 4 of them. Those are reflective of what the test looks like. 5, wow, my gosh. I'm like, every they're updating it by the minute, apparently. You get a handful of them. I'll cover myself. You get a handful of them, and those are the most reflective of what the exam looks like. So generally, you want to save those towards the end to get a realistic idea of how you would score on the MCAT. So don't like blow through them as like your diagnostics. Maybe take 1. I don't know if there may be a strategy to use 1 as a diagnostic, but like wait till you're like feel comfortable. Like, oh, I'm taking my MCAT in 2 weeks. Let me see, if I had to take it right now, what that would look like and what your score is, and do I feel comfortable with that? Do I feel like I could improve enough in 2 weeks where I would be comfortable then? So that's how you should use those practice tests that they give you. So those are 2 important things. Tzvi, was there a specific Anki deck that you used that you felt was like extremely helpful?
So I used the Mile Downs deck.
Okay.
I think you can get it on Reddit. I didn't have time to go through the different like types of decks. I used that one, and it was based off Kaplan, which I found to be helpful because I'd used the Kaplan books. So like, they just used the Kaplan like information, and like it was very similar. So I found that to be very helpful to use that deck in conjunction with Kaplan.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think Kaplan has really become kind of the staple of like general review and getting a lot of the basic concepts down. So it makes sense to do like Anki that reviews specifically to Kaplan. Someone did mention the Jack Sparrow, which I have seen before. I can't make a recommendation on it, but if one thing that is like always reigns true, if something comes up a lot and lots of students are using a specific resource, generally that's a good indication that there's something redeemable about it. It's a good resource you should likely use. All right, Chaimwitz, yeah. David,
Yeah, I
tell
just
us.
wanted to add, I've been speaking to lots of med students and asking them what they've done. I've been specifically asking about flashcards and which decks they've been using. And well, first of all, any students that have used the Miles Down Anki deck have done extremely well in the psych-social section. It's just, some people have relied on it just for that and have seen they've seen good results without really going to anything else. But that deck really comes highly recommended. Like people just rely on that a lot. So
Okay, you've heard it. You heard it here first, folks. I would take that seriously. If like people are saying like, yes, this is the #1 resource we use and we've all like crushed it. Like Anki is incredibly powerful. I really can't stress that. Like if you can't learn something, sometimes you could just brute force it into your head, which like I find that like that's what medical school is about, just brute forcing like tons of random facts. Okay, cool. Why don't you share, David, and I don't know if Rami is still here, but you guys kind of worked on a list of some of the more common like resources out there. I don't think we talked about it. I think we covered a very good background. If like there's one thing, if I were pre-med listening to the session, like I would kind of like start with Kaplan, move on to Scott Roberts, and supplement with Anki Miles Down. And that sounds like a really strong strategy. And those are all new things. I mean, I did Kaplan and Scott Roberts, but like based on what I'm hearing, that really sounds like a good, solid, fundamental plan. So that's what I would take. That's what I would take away if I were a pre-med. But I would love to hear a little bit more about some of the other resorts, David. But Moshe, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. My question isn't how do I start studying for the MCAT two years in advance or a year in advance? Like I'm like a year out from the MCAT, but or
Okay.
a year plus. But my question is there any benefit to nominally just get used to the MCAT style? Maybe 20 minutes a week. If the guy's a year off of taking the MCAT, are doing anything preparatory, obviously not intense, or just focus on 100% of your classes and just leave it for like those 3-4 months before.
Right. I feel like that's like a style question. From my just only speaking for myself, I always found it like I never end up doing that. I never found it helpful. Like when it's time to study, it's time to study. The MCAT is like a very different beast than a lot of things you're going to encounter. And like when you get in the rhythm of it, you get in the rhythm. Like I felt like taking time away from my courses to like kind of preemptively study for a test I don't really know too much about. Like right now, if I had to study for an exam I don't know anything about, and I don't know if a resource is good, or I don't know if like it's representative of the MCAT, like I feel like that'd be a little bit of a waste. That's always kind of been my approach. I definitely can hear someone saying like, no, I read a passage a week and I found it very helpful. But my instinct, having kind of been around the block, would have been like, really, was it helpful? Was it necessary? You're talking about very minimal like time, right? So when you study for your MCAT, you're investing hours and hours and hours, 10, 15 minutes a week. What are you totaling? A few hours over the course of that year. When you actually get a chance to do it, those few hours would easily be consumed by doing like one extra day, So that would kind of be my, like, I wouldn't stress about it. That would be my approach. I can hear others with others, but I speak for my own.
Could I weigh in also? I have like a thought about this just because I actually did this. I spent like 20 minutes about a year away in the MCAT just watching.
There you go. There you go.
There you go. But so I actually would tend to agree with Mark, happens to be on this. I think Mark's generally right. I was in a bit of a unique situation because I took AP physics in high school. So I skipped college physics. So I had absolutely no physics background going into college and going into the MCAT really. So I figured I needed to really like up my physics knowledge, a real, I guess, like ahead of the MCAT. So I just watched Khan Academy, which I think is a safe bet. Because like Mark's saying, I think is like totally right. Using a random resource that you don't know if it's going to be good, you don't know if it's going to be a waste of time, you don't know if it's going to send you in the wrong direction. But I think if you're just trying to get a refresh, you're trying to keep some content in your head, if you're going to a safe resource, let's like Khan Academy, which is really just giving you knowledge, like it's really just basic content review, I think you can't go wrong if you need it. But like Mark's saying, I think it's, if you don't need it, if you're just doing it because you think you're a nervous wreck a year out from the MCAT, then I would say it's not worth it.
I would add, if I had to do one resource kind of preemptively before I hardcore studied for something, I would use Anki. Like playing around with like a few cards to refresh. And I wouldn't do that a year in advance. I would do that maybe like I'm finishing a semester. I know I'm going to hit MCAT studying really hard in like 2 weeks, but you want to like dip your feet in and get your toes wet. So you're a little bit into it. Anki might be like the perfect opportunity for that. But that's even that, like we're talking like 2 weeks out, like not super necessary. But if I could imagine one resource being helpful as a way to get yourself a little bit started, I would like Anki has been helpful. Like I do that now sometimes if I have the chance with like rotations, I'll try to like do some cards earlier on and stuff like that. Zeesh, what do we owe the pleasure?
Hey, one small thing, I agree with almost everything else that was said. I think you didn't pay enough attention to doing questions before. I think many students pay way too much attention and dedicate way too much time to content review, which is not always as useful for the test. The test is, I would say, 50% luck and 50% skills, just test taking skills.
Right.
For me, I wasted a lot of time doing MCAT King, which is great. Shout out to him. And content review, but you get a lot farther, a lot quicker just by doing questions. So I highly recommend UWorld. As you get closer to the actual test date, you can use the AMC resources, which are even better, but just do questions. Don't wait if you see gaps, you can always go and, learn about that on the side, but start doing questions right away. Don't waste time.
Yeah.
Another quick tip is if you have the money and you're scoring somewhat decently on your practice test, schedule an exam, take it to void. That'll give you an advantage. You'll eliminate all the test taking anxiety of it being in a new environment, knowing how it works. It can be anxiety provoking for someone taking it for the first time. I did that personally, and I really think it paid off.
Interesting.
It was,
I haven't
was a
heard
good-
that strategy. I can see that. I don't know that I would say that should be kind of the gold standard, but I definitely hear it as a strategy. But I'll just explain for the students who may not know. So after you take the MCAT, you have the chance for it to not be scored. You can walk away from the table and say, I don't want this scored. No medical schools will get a score. Like, it won't go on your record, and that's called voiding your exam. So what Zish is saying is that to like kind of get over like any test jitters or nervousness or anxiety, you can sit down for the entire MCAT and be completely consequence free by at the end saying, I want to void my exam. I don't want it graded, and nothing will go on your record. And then the next time you take your exam for real, you'll have already have had that like days experience of like going through the thing, which I hear it as I definitely hear it as a strategy, and especially because you're saying it worked. And for those who don't know, Zish is at the University of Pennsylvania. So like he's in a good school, he did well. So there's definitely something there. I can't vouch for it. Like, I haven't done it. But it's something to think about. But 100% with the test questions, I completely agree. Questions are super important. Don't just focus on content review. Generally, what I found is like maybe the first 2 weeks, you want to like, if you're really not even up to par to take questions, fine. But like get your feet wet early, take questions, do it alongside your content review. It's really helpful when you're seeing something in content review and then you see it in a question and application. It brings out those concepts much better. It's like, it's synergistic. So absolutely do those questions early on. One thing helpful for me is Scott Roberts has a thing where you can buy, I forget how much it costs, but you can buy like 10 practice MCATs. And I didn't find that the questions were like the most representative of the exam, but it really helped build just that stamina of taking an MCAT every other day. So it helped build a lot of content. It helped me like be able to sit down for an exam. If you can do something like that, I highly recommend it. Like sitting down for more exams and doing a lot of questions at a time, timing yourself, replicating it, replicating exam conditions is definitely the way to go.
Mark, a comment about practice exams, third-party exams.
Yeah.
It is really easy. They're not representative always, as you just said. And so people take the practice exams and they get not the score they were looking for, and then it just really gets them down. But the truth is, it's not representative at all. Don't take those exams as your, as where you're holding. Your only like real, like point of information should be from the AAMC, and that's it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, you have to know where the information is coming from. Most third-party resources are not the most representative. Okay, so David,
something just real
yeah,
quick.
go for it.
So regarding the third-party tests and even some of the practice questions on AMC, something that I learned like sort of in my studying is that a lot of the third-party tests are based on the old MCAT, which is more knowledge and content based, and also even some of the AMC like practice questions. I'm not sure which ones, but they're also some of them are the old MCAT. You can clearly tell the difference. Like when you get to a physics passage and it's like a diagram of a pitcher with his arm and like the vectors and all these different things, like you can know that's the old MCAT style question. So I just keep that in mind. Like you'd want to practice, focus more on the AMC questions for sure, but specifically the AMC questions that are the new MCAT. They have like a bunch of question packs on the website that are very useful. Specifically the CARS one. Like I personally believe that. Like I did a lot of third-party CARS things, and I found that the only thing that was really helpful was the AMC the question packs that they have, and just to keep track of how long you're taking on each passage. So that's just what I have my 2 cents about that.
Great. Okay, so David, I want to get to those resources. but I do want to like kind of summarize like for students, like some of the things we've talked about that like, because I'm learning too, right? This is like, I haven't done MCAT in a long time. So just to summarize some of the things, we talked a lot about just style and knowing yourself and things like that. So I don't feel like I need to emphasize that. I think you guys get it. Choose what works for you, right? Do content plus questions. I think in terms of like style, we covered a lot, but in terms of strict resources, I think lots of people have used Kaplan as a base. It's certainly not, the end all, but Kaplan is probably a good base. The Anki is a good supplement to review Kaplan. Scott is probably a great resource to narrow down exactly what you need to know. And the practice exams, questions, are a good opportunity to also find where your holes are and see what you need to focus on. And it seems like Jack Weston, I used it, I didn't love it, but it seems like some students are saying that that's kind of like a little bit of a gold standard in terms of like reviewing cars for those who have trouble, which I think that is the hard part for a lot of students, is the reading comprehension stuff. Although again, anything from AMC is going to be more representative. So, but that means it's a better resource and a more like scarce resource. So if you have limited AMC stuff, just be careful of how you use it. You don't want to blow through it in the beginning when you're kind of exponentially learning. You want to get to it when you feel like you have a good base and like you'll actually gain from those questions, right? If in the beginning you're just going to get everything wrong, it's not helpful to use that like precious resource. Like save that resource once you feel you have a better base. Okay, David, why don't you take us through some of the additional resources out there that seem to be very common for students?
Right. So while we've been sitting here for about an hour going through resources, so a lot of them have actually been mentioned already.
Awesome.
But I think that there's basically three things that it came down to. One of them is practicing just stamina, which a lot was spoken about. There's content, but like Zisha was saying, I think more than content, a lot of it is practicing, just getting through it. So instead of presenting specific resources, names of everything, there are tons and tons of options. There's basically, there's like three types of things types of resources that you can have. You can have those giant, comprehensive Kaplan, Princeton, Sketchy, which go through everything. And then you'll have other people like Scott Roberts, which are more application. So I think those are two separate skills, and you have to know where you are. So if you're at a stage where you need content review, go for one of those content review courses, which are much longer. They might be more expensive. Like Scott Roberts is, I think, like $200 for a month right now, or $25 a session or something like that. Like he's pretty cheap, but he's focused more on application from what I can understand. So I think a lot of it is really just getting the content, but at some point not being scared to shift towards application. Because if you're not applying it, you're not going to do well. So reading, comprehension, and application. So some of the things that Abraham was saying, I don't know if he's still here, was he wanted to just stress like UWorld and things like that. But the basic gist of it is that you need to be doing lots of practice content. So that's what I think really is. There's not that much like you can say like do this or do that. Everything works for different people. You have to target your skills. And what I've noticed is that I spoke to a lot of people who prepped for the MCAT and did well, and people that did the best were the ones that targeted their weaknesses. So find it. The way to do it is by taking practice questions.
So like we kind of opened up with that like important like self-reflection, understanding who you are, understanding what you need, and then understanding what the resource is, right? So you're going to want to break down resources into content resources, application resources, right? You're not going to compare Scott Roberts to Kaplan. You could do both, and you should likely do both. So I think that's a great way to think about it, David. That's awesome. Like you're going to think about content and you're going to think about application, and you're going to want a combination of both. And then if you could get details on what kind of content is being covered or how it's covered, that would be best. So my 2 cents on UWorld, it's awesome. But if you're like a me type of student that like doing the extra hard questions is not as helpful, because then you just get it wrong and then you get frustrated and you can't move forward, then maybe don't. But if you're the type of students like, yeah, I want to be pushed where I know the hard stuff, so when I get to the exam, that stuff's easy, then for sure. So try to understand like, what kind of content is it? If you're looking at a content, trying to understand what kind of application. Is it reflective of the MCAT, or is it more helpful to just kind of build stamina and or is it better for cars, or is it better for a psych? So just I think that's kind of the narrative you should go in your head when you're evaluating resources. But I think we really covered a lot. I want to thank everyone who like pitched in. That was awesome. You guys really like covered all the things I didn't. And I think, I mean, I really hope that the students like are walking away with something helpful, because I never had the opportunity to sit down with 5, 6 medical students, like all saying what they did and what they found helpful and being able to pick out resources like that. So thank you to all the students who shared their experiences. And if anyone has any questions, we'll stick on for a few minutes just to answer individualized questions.